Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. There are 6 days to go until Tarawera Ultra Trail. It's getting incredibly excited. It's always around this time of the year that people start to ask questions about what the weather's going to be like, and we'll talk about that in a second. But also personally, I see the hype that's going on, the wonderful racing that's happening, like Black Canyon over in the US. I see my friends who are incredibly fit, and I get this real urge to just dive in and enter the 100k or the 100 mile, and I know I'm not going to. But I still get that massive urge to do it every single year just because I see how great a race it's going to be. And particularly in the 100 mile, not so much at the elite end of things, but just that one step down, the sort of sub-elite thing. Particularly in New Zealand, we've got a whole bunch of people who they're in great shape. They've trained really, really hard. The weather's been wonderful. They're looking good. And just see how they're going to throw down at Tarawera during the race. And I, for one, cannot wait to see what happens. I'm going to be out there on course. Hopefully, if I get me media accreditation, I'll be there with the camera and do some filming. And if you run past me or see me, please say hello. I'm just so excited about the whole thing. I am every year. Now, today in my final video on the series about the Tarawera 100 mile, I'm going to talk a little bit about Q&A. So I stuck a few posts up on social media saying if you've got any questions, please reach out. And so I've got maybe a dozen questions I'm kind of going to run through, and I'll extemporize about them a little bit and just talk about them. So starting off, how technical is the trail and the race itself? Not that technical. Most of it is either single track, there's a little bit of road, or forestry, gravel road. You can run it in road or trail shoes. It's really not a problem. There are a couple of sections that are sort of semi-technical, but a lot of those are on the Eastern Okataina, which is closed and not in the race this year. So most of the rest of it, not at all technical. Next question, is there any rope, chain or ladder climbing? No. None of that kind of thing on Tarawera. There used to be on the Raglan Karrioi Trail, which was an absolute monster of a race, but not at Tarawera. It's just not that kind of race. Kind of related note, are there any sections where road shoes make sense? Now, my view is you can run the whole of any of the distances in either trail shoes or road shoes or any kind of combination of the two. Last year, a guy I know called Gavin was wearing Nike Vaporflies, really, on the trail, and I ran past him and called him a cheating bastard as I did so. He then took that back and then came in with it in a pretty good, well under 20 hours, I think, if I remember correctly. You know, my friend Thomas Westaway, when we did a trial run, he ran in a pair of Nike Tempo Next Percents, which have a huge wedged heel. You don't need to run in trail shoes. And the only exception to that, I'd say, is when it's really, really wet. Then it might be worth having trail shoes, but doesn't really matter. Trail shoes, road shoes. I've run it in very, very low profile Innovates, which have amazing grip. My favorite shoes to run in are Nike Terra Kyga on the trails. They don't have amazingly good grip and they cope just fine at Tarawera, so it's really not an issue at all. Moving on, did I change shoes when I ran it in 2019 and 2023? I didn't change shoes in 2019. I ran all in a pair of Innovate Trail Rock 255s, I think it were, which is like a incredibly non-padded 4mm drop shoe, which worked really, really well for me. They don't make them anymore, unfortunately. And I ran through all the way those, and I did get them quite wet at one point. They dry out really, really quickly. Doesn't matter. I did change shoes last year. I was running, I think I started off in a pair of Nike Zagamas, and they were just a little bit tight, so I had a second pair that were half a size larger. I changed into them after about 100k. Generally, I wouldn't change my shoes in a race, though. I'm a one shoe kind of guy at pretty much any distance, but you can if you really want to. I wouldn't bother personally, but again, that's kind of what you've trained with and what you feel comfortable with. But personally, I'll pick a pair of shoes and I'll just get on with it. I don't see that it's going to add anything to it. Any tips for managing the day-night transition? Humans are diurnal. We operate on a day-night cycle where we've got two competing systems, or two systems that operate in synergy. There's a system based around a chemical called adenosine, which is called sleep pressure. And that just builds up over time. Some things knock it back. Having a nap knocks it back. Having caffeine knocks it back. And then superimposed on that, you have your normal diurnal day-night cycle. So when the sun comes up, our bodies wake up because we recognize it's time to be up and around and doing things. And when the sun goes down, our bodies tend to slow down as well around that cycle. Now, obviously, over time, your sleep pressure just goes up and up and up and up and up. And the longer you stay awake, the more it stays like that. But your diurnal cycle goes up and down. So even if you haven't had any sleep overnight, you'll start to feel better around dawn. So practically the things you can do are just cope with it. It's really not that bad. If you're going to be, say, a 30-hour finish, a 27, 28-hour finish, which is probably about the average, just keep going. It's really not that bad. Caffeine absolutely can help. Caffeine knocks back adenosine, so knocks back your sleep pressure a little bit and makes it less acute. So that can definitely help if you have trained with it. You should not try anything new on race day. So if you haven't trained with caffeine, don't use it. And we'll talk a little bit more about caffeine in a second. Diurnal side of things, not a lot you can do about. That's just normal. Just work your way through and just keep going. Maybe listen to some loud music or something like that. Bit of five-finger death punch, death metal in the night really works for me. Caffeine tips. So when I ran it in 2019, my wife, God bless her, brought me a cappuccino with cinnamon and 1 sugar at Okataina, and I felt like that really, really helped. I wasn't using caffeine systemically at that point, but I definitely felt like a double shot of espresso kept me going. So you can have a coffee, you can buy caffeinated gels, there are Pro Plus tablets. It's not dangerous, and caffeine is one of the few supplements that actually has some science going for it. So really, really well worth doing it if you have trained with it. If you haven't trained with it to date, it's probably a little bit late to give it a go now. So if you are a coffee drinker, yeah, absolutely have a coffee at Okataina, or get one of your crew or something to bring you something like that if that works for you. Interestingly enough, some people metabolize caffeine very, very well and very quickly, and it has quite a marked effect on them. Other people don't. That's genetic, so there's not a lot you can do about it. So if you're trained with caffeine and you respond well to caffeine, use it. If you haven't, you're just going to suck it up. Sorry. Yeah, it's just one of those things, really. Related note, dirt nap or push through. I'm definitely a push through kind of guy. I didn't have a nap in 2019, and I didn't seriously consider it. I felt like a zombie and looked like death going through Miller Road, but you just kind of get on with it. Some people I do know have had sort of 10-minute dirt naps in the middle of Tarawera, but it's one night. It's not that bad, so make sure you get plenty of sleep. Go to bed really, really early the night before, and maybe over a few days before that, go to bed a little bit earlier to try and gain a couple of hours of extra sleep. But other than that, I wouldn't have a dirt nap personally, but it does work for some people. It's also useful as a plan B if your day is really, really not going to plan and you're starting to have a think about DNFing. What you can do is an interesting one is you can have some caffeine and then you can have a dirt nap. And by the time the caffeine kicks in 15, 20 minutes, you've had a little bit of a snooze, at least a rest, and shut your eyes and just had some quiet moments to yourself, and then the caffeine will kick in and you can get on with it. So could be useful as a plan B, but I keep it as a plan B personally. How long did it take me when I ran the 100 miler? So in 2019, it took me 23 hours, 33 minutes and 36 seconds. I was 14th. That was on a harder course than the one we have this year, because it had Eastern Okataina, and it had more vert as well, but it was a much smaller field, so I wouldn't come 14th these days. I might scrape the top 25 if I was really lucky and had a good day, but definitely not sort of top 15, top 10. Interesting question around poisonous bushes. Someone remarked that they'd heard we have poisonous bushes in New Zealand, and what do we do about them? As far as I'm aware, the only thing we have is a native stinging nettle, which is a bit like the kind of stinging nettles you get in the UK or Europe, but much worse. It's not as bad as Jimpy tree that you get in Australia. I have never seen any kind of stinging nettle. Apparently the Latin name is Urtica ferox. Who knew? I've never seen it around the course at Tarawera, and I've never heard of anyone getting stung, so don't worry about it. I think it's just one of those things that if you do, it's probably not very fun. Try and remove the hairs, get on with it. You know, there's not a lot you can do. But certainly, I've never seen any of it. I know what it looks like. I've seen it in and around the north-south track in the Kaimai, and seen photos of it. But I've never been stung by it. I've never known of anyone been stung by it. I've never seen it anywhere near the course in Tarawera, so I don't think it's very likely. Tips on food. Try and eat 200 calories, so that's 840 kilojoules per hour, or 2 gels. Absolute minimum, probably 3 is better if you can manage it. The more you can eat and not puke or have gastric distress, the better, because you are burning about 100 calories, which is 420 kilojoules, for every mile you run. So what's that? That's around 270-ish per kilometre. Pretty much regardless of speed, it doesn't change that much. And if you're going to be covering, say, in 25 hours, that's 4 miles an hour, 6.4 kilometres an hour. So you need to have at least 400 calories, so 1,680 kilojoules per hour, to replace the amount of energy you're using. Now, because you're burning a mixture of sugar and fat, it's probably not like you're just burning sugar like you would in, say, a marathon or something like that. But you've got to replace what you're putting in terms of fluid, in terms of calories, and in terms of electrolytes. Salt, table salt being the major one. So things that work for me: gels, jelly sweets, soft Indian roti. You can buy them in packs of 8 in a lot of veggie stores. So Marganav in West Auckland, near where I live, I go and buy them there. I find they're soft enough and they're not too claggy. And if I'm feeling good at the time, I'll quite often have some of them with chocolate spread in, just to add some more calories, some more sugar, and a little bit of fat in there, and a bit of taste. And I find those tend to work. Other things: pretzels. Pretzels are great, love them. Salty, multi-flavour. You've got to try lots and lots of things to know what works. I don't have a lot of time for eating aid station food. Sometimes I do, but mostly I don't. I train with things that I know have worked in the time for me. I'm increasingly working with Morton powders, so 160 and 320 powder, which you pour in and mix in with your hydration. So I think they have NAC at the aid stations. If you've tried it and it works for you, hey, fantastic. Get the calories, get the fluid in, a little bit of salt, and you'll be absolutely fine. Other things, some people like potatoes, other people use baby food sachets, but again, nothing new in race day. Stick with what you've trained with. Pacing approach. Someone said, do you sprint at the start and then grind it away, or should you try and do it evenly? Go out slow, speed up towards the end if you feel like you can. And you've just got to judge it based on feel. You can do it to a degree according to a plan, but in those planning spreadsheets on some of the websites now that are starting to offer pacing plans, you can stick any finish time you like in, and it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So you've got to be realistic. So practically, start out slow, work your way into the race. Charging out like a mad person and then bonking is a recipe for a really rubbish time, or a DNF, as I found in 2023. And I felt like I only overcooked it very, very slightly, and I died at Rutakakahi at about 80 miles, 132 kilometers or thereabouts in. So go out at a sensible pace. If you do go out at a sensible pace, you will see that you will just gradually pull your way past people who did what I did and ran like an idiot. But also, the race will spread out really quickly. So I know the out and back section on Okataina is probably going to be quite busy at times, but I'm pretty sure the race organisers will thought about the timings for the different distances. So go out slow, speed up if you can, definitely. My good friend Blitz T. Spitz says, who's going to carry the boats? Blitz, it's not that kind of race. Good dog. Good videos to watch on Tarawera. So I've got a couple. I've got one of me doing the 102. I've got one of my friend Gene Andrews completing the 100 mile in 2021, I think it was, in 34 hours and some change. He really dug deep and ground through. Well worth watching. Best video there is around Tarawera is a film by my mate Aaron called Finding Panamu. It shows up on the Facebook page and linked everywhere all of the time. I'll link it below. It is a real tearjerker. It's a fantastic emotional story. Really, really well worth watching. Other things on a more practical note, obviously I've got this series, CMF running, my friends Chris and Charlotte, they've done some course previews which I've not been able to do this year, and so they've got one for the 100k. In fact, I think they have one for each of the 4 distances, but they've also got one on mental skills for the longer distances, which I thought is absolutely fantastic, and really, really well worth a watch. And finally, the night before the race, you should watch Before Your Next 100-mile race, which is a video by Billy Yang. It is a speech given by well-known American ultra runner Andy James Wilkins to a bunch of people at the veterans panel before the Western States 100 mile. It's full of great advice, sets expectations about what your day could well be like, and how you should go into the race mentally. And it is absolutely, absolutely worth a watch. It really is. Final question, what is the weather going to be like? So I'm looking at Met Service for Rotorua, and it's saying most of the week's going to be lovely, then it's going to cloud over a bit, and then it says on Saturday a few showers with light winds. Max high of 26 degrees, low of 13. That's really good conditions, I think. That's really nice conditions, because if we get a little bit of cloud, that damps things down a bit. A little bit of rain's not necessarily a bad thing either, because the course can get really incredibly dusty, and the rain just damps that down a little bit. And also when it's been really hot and dry, when it rains, you get this wonderful smell out of the soil called petrichor, which is great. Petrichor literally translated means blood of the gods. And I think it's one of those wonderful smells you get out on the trail when you're out running. So, and you've got to take positive in things that might otherwise challenge you. So a little bit of rain, no bad thing on the day. Now, with 6 days to go, I'm really looking forward to it. My own training is going not bad, actually. I've strung together a couple of really, really good weeks with quite a lot of vert, because I'm running Northburn, which has, I think, 3 times as much vertical gain as Tarawera. So while my training isn't fast, I'm getting out there, I'm enjoying the really good weather, plenty of sunblock and a hat on, to make sure we don't get any sunburn, because if you haven't been here and run in New Zealand like many internationals, the sun is absolutely ferocious and burn you terribly. So please, please, please wear sunblock. So I'm going to be down from Thursday morning. I'm incredibly looking forward to just drinking in the atmosphere of the race and having a great time. I hope your training is all going really well and you're really nicely tapered. Now at this point, a final piece of advice before we wind up for this evening is, don't do anything new on race day, but also don't get into this weird mindset or this urge that you've got to test your fitness. Don't go out and do a 5k time trial. Now you may laugh, some of you, but I have actually seen people go and do, fast intervals, like at full volume, or go and do a 5k time trial a few days before a really big race. Don't. There is no need to. Trust in your training, trust in the process. And when you go out on that start line, know you've done the work to have the day you need to. Have a great few days, get plenty of sleep, and I really look forward to seeing you all down in Rotorua.